We are starting today Tzurba Mirabonan volume, English edition, volume 17, the Lax family edition, the Paris family volume. We are holding in the middle of Hilchos Shabbat. We're still in the Aseis of Shabbat, the to-dos of Shabbat, and we ready. The last time we did a new shir was on Hilchot Kiddush part 1. So today we do Hilchot Kiddush part 2. There are many halachot that pertain to Kiddush, and today we are going to focus on, as you can see on the index in the front of the shir, hearing Kiddush from others, the proper time for Kiddush, Kiddush Rabbah, right, the Kiddush of Shabbat day, and Kiddush over Challah, we've heard about this, and over Chamar Medina, drinks other than wine. So we'll get into those halachot Be'ez Hashem today. Okay, so we're on page 21, and we're starting, and we all know famous concept known as Shomea Ka'onet, someone who hears something as if he's saying it. It's applicable in Tefillah, it's applicable for many parts. The question here is that he brings from Yosodei Yeshurun. This is Rabbi Gedaliah Felder, who's actually a cousin of Rabbi Gedaliah Shor, Rosh Hashiva of Torah V'dat. He was situated in Toronto. And he has a question of the miftah, the pronunciations. Okay, so his question was: you have a Temani guy reading the Kiddush, and everybody there is Hasidish, and their Havaras, the pronunciations are very different. Can one be Yotze the other? Okay, his question is a little bit less dramatic in the bold. Mishliach Tzibur Haba Polania. He's coming from Poland. Right, and he has a Polish accent to his Hebrew. Right, might say who at Yehudei Lita. He might say the Lithuanian Jews who pronounce the words and letters differently. Or Hungary, or a Hungarian Jew, or Lehefech, or the opposite. Right, and he brings from the Rabbi Tzion Uziel in his Mishrei Uziel that don't worry, it's not a problem of Al Titosh Torah Timecha. Don't forget the Misorah of your mother, right? Usually we say you have a Misorah, you have to keep to the Misorah. However, a person could be Yotzeh through a different pronunciation, right? And his Ketzatz Raya, he writes over here, Rav Felder, is that, it says in the Gemara that Birkat HaMazon and Tefillah could be said in any Lashon, right? Any language. Any language can mean, and any accent too. And so he says, it should be okay. He says, Ashkenazi l'Sfardi, same the opposite, that it should be okay for one to say it at the for the other. Okay, what about different nusachs? So, first of all, what is the main part of Kiddush? Kiddush night. Where's the main part of Kiddush? Friday night. Bari Priya Gafen and the bracha Mekadosh Shabbat. Right. The Yom Hashishi Vaychul Hashemayim V'Aretz, it's very nice, but it's not necessarily makiv into the Kiddush. Kiddush is very Priya Gafen, and the Mekadosh Shabbat. Shabbat morning, we're going to see what Kiddush is, but Havdalah, we're on page 22. Havdalah also. What is the main part of Havdalah? Where does the brachos of Havdalah start from? Where's if I have to make Havdalah, where do I have to hear?
Hagefen first.
Bari Priya Gafen. Bari Samim, Bari Ha'esh, Mazen Kol Shecho. Those are the berachot. That's the actual Havdalah. But my question is, Kos Yeshuot Esav, Shem Hashem Yekah, Ana Bonai Sheana, No Shesichana. It's not mi'akev, right? No. So then he brings that about the nusach, saying don't get old. And I'll tell you, it's a true thing. When I was a young boy, and I was in Mesivta, and we went away to a Shabbaton, and they were making Havdalah. It's the first time in my life I heard an Ashkenazic Havdalah. And the psukim before Bari Priya Gafen for them, right, is different than the psukim that we say. So in my mind, I was thinking, I can't be Yotzei through this. This is all wrong, right? And then when my Rebbeim said, no, the main thing is the brachos. The brachos are the same. You can be Yotzei through it. Okay.
To be open.
Yeah. Okay, you have to know what the main thing. You have to know what the right thing is and what's not. So the laws of Shabbat here, Rabbi Nachson, he writes an interesting idea, part of it. I want to just read over here outside the Tzurba for a moment. He writes, if a Sephardi can fulfill his obligation of Kiddush by hearing the recitation of an Ashkenazic Jew. But he writes here a little bit of a little qualification. Provided that he's familiar with the pronunciation of Ashkenazim and can understand the words that are being said. I mean, if it's like this really Hasidic guy who's saying, and no one understand what he's saying, right? And it's like so like like I've davened, like you daven sometimes in Satmar, the old Sephardic Jews, like they can't, they don't understand what he's saying. This guy's reading Hebrew. What is he saying? Right? Then perhaps here he says that he's not Yotze. He won't be Yotze the Kiddush because he's not understanding what he's saying. You have to understand somewhat what he's saying.
But anyway, he's Yotze by the Tfilat Arvit, by Hanan.
The Veichulu and the Arvit is making his Kiddush the Araita. Okay, but we're saying, what about regular Kiddush?
Either the Kiddush of Erev Shabbat or either the Motzei Shabbat, he also is, for him, is the Havdalah.
Right. So he's saying you have to be able to understand what he is saying. An interesting another horror he writes over here in the Laws of Shabbat. Rabbi Nachson writes, if a Sephardi is reciting Kiddush for Ashkenazi, he's not allowed to change his own Havar, his pronunciation. Right? Sometimes you have Ashkenazim around. Some people tend to be a little bit funny and they want to say, and they want to umain. You can't do that. Right? You have to stick to your Havar. They should stick to their Havar and we should stick to our Havar. Here in the Yalkut Yosef outside the Tzurba for 1 minute on page 223.
He's very much against it. For people changing or...
Yeah, we're not supposed to change.
Right.
Well, just right, he writes over here, Ashkenazi Jews may fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush or Havdalah by listening to someone say it in a Sephardic way. Sephardic Jews may fulfill it by listening to someone saying it in Ashkenazic pronunciation. There's no need to insist on hearing them pronounced according to one's own tradition. Okay? As long as you can understand it, you can hear it from anybody who says it. The only time that we're kind of machmer that you should hear it the right way is really twice, really. The main one is Parsha Zachor, right? Parsha Zachor, it's brought down that if you're Sephardi, you should hear it Sephardic style. If Ashkenazi, you should hear it Ashkenazic style. The other time they bring it down also from Megillah, right? Because it says I'm Kilshona, right? And everybody according to the lashon, everybody according to the language, and so everyone tries to make it to hear it from their own expression. Just historically, and you can find this in the Yalkut Yosef Purim edition, English edition, the Purim, when it comes to Parsha Zachor over there, which pronunciation is more correct, right? So obviously, it's hard to want to say. We all know our pronunciation is more correct. Interesting though, the Stipler Gaon once took out a newspaper advertisement that said Sephardim should need to change the way they say Amunai, right? And his thing was that he's saying that the komets is a komets and it should be right, and not like a lot of Sephardim say. Moran Shalom Tzion was not very happy with this, right? He said before you start telling the Sephardim how to pronounce the komets, you should learn how to pronounce the het and the ayin, right? So right, and it brings Rabbi Adler, he went and paid people, Adler paid people to teach him how to speak, how to pronounce Hebrew in the Sephardic way. So you have many Ashkenazic Gedolim who said, in fact, I remember Rav Belsky, when he was laying, you can hear him making the ayin and the het. He used to make all those letters. You can actually hear it. Yeah, Rav Belsky used to put it in. You can hear him saying it. So there is an Indian that
how to say it,
that we should have,
especially the ayin.
Ayin. Okay, fine. But that's just a little background on pronunciations. We're saying for most things that we will go with either way. Parsha Zachor is the one time we really try to stick to our proper thing. That's the right thing. Kiddush most times on one, we're really ready after davening, so Kiddush on one. Right. Okay, we're making on that. All right.
I don't know why Rabbi Felder brings it up now. Why didn't bring it up for anything else?
I'm sure he does. He'll just bring in here as well. Okay, Yom Tov Sheni Kilchato on page 22, source 2. He deals with the case as follows. So we're B'nai Chutz La'aretz. We come to Eretz Yisrael. Okay, we have second day Yom Tov because we're planning to come back to America. Can my Israeli host make Kiddush for me on my second day of Yom Tov, which is his Yemei Chol? Of course he can't. Right. So that's Pasha. Right? He doesn't have a chiyuv.
Exactly.
He doesn't have a chiyuv, so he can't be to someone else. So same thing if we're here, right? we're in the United States, and an Israeli guest comes to us, and he's going to go back to Israel, so he's only keeping one day, right? Although he shouldn't do malach in public or whatever else, can he make Kiddush for the second day? No, because it's not Yom Tov for him anymore. It's my Yom Tov, not his. He doesn't have a chiyuv, right? So that's a simple one. Another question, in source number 3, the Or L'Tzion was asked. Rabbi Tzion Abba Shaul was asked him after it said Kiddush Sheshemo Mechalel Shabbat. Right? We have an event going on, right? Or even yet, better yet, look at source number 4. Rabbi Melamed has a question that's brought to him. A 16-year-old girl who became more religious. Her parents are respectful of her choice to become more religious, but they themselves are not keeping Shabbat. But they said, since you want to keep Shabbat, we'll have Friday night seudah. So the father, who's Mechalel Shabbat, says, I'm going to make Kiddush. But he insists. He says, we respect you, and we want to make Kiddush. So there's 2 approaches here. Two approaches. The Or L'Tzion says that you cannot be Yotze from someone who's Mechalel Shabbat. Okay? If you find yourself in a place where the guy saying Kiddush Mechalel Shabbat, then you should find yourself 2 pieces of bread, or find yourself more wine to make Kiddush. You don't have wine, make Kiddush on bread, right? And you get away that way.
Probably better.
Okay, if you can get it, for sure. But let's say he can't. He doesn't want to give it to you. The Or L'Tzion, in the footnote over here, in the footnote number 3, he writes that actually it's not number 3. Okay, so Rabbi Melamed says as follows. He says, because he's showing some respect, Rabbi Melamed paskins that her father can. This is all based on a Gemara in Eruvin. The Gemara in Eruvin tells us, and Daf 69, you take a look at the little box in the middle. Rabbi Abba Shaul adds, a person reciting Kiddush would be embarrassed to desecrate Shabbat in the presence of an Adam Gadol, right? There's room to say he's not a true Mechalel Shabbat. It's based on the Gemara in Eruvin 69.
If he's making the Kiddush, he's
right.
already...
Right. He's showing some respect to Shabbat.
So what? But number 3 should be the same thing.
What?
Number 3 should be the same thing.
So it depends. So perhaps, and this is Rabbi Tzion Abba Shaul writes in his own footnote.
Yeah.
So perhaps Rabbi Tzion Abba Shaul said that he ain't say the Chovah is when this guy never shows respect to Shabbat, right? And we know he doesn't really care about it.
Why
you invited him to Sheva Brachot. He's there. He's at the Sheva Brachot. He's the oldest guy there, so he wants to make the Kiddush.
He wants.
So you're having the trouble. But if you know that he somewhat respects Shabbat, that's what Rabbi Lama is trying to go one step further and saying the fact that he's saying Kiddush shows, but it's not necessarily true. Because sometimes there are traditional Jews to an extent that they're just doing it.
Conservative.
We're doing it because we do it, not necessarily because we have respect for Shabbat. It's just Friday night we make Kiddush, right? So how do you view that? So it's a little bit tricky. It's a little bit tricky.
It's like Tovel b'sheretz b'yado.
Yes. So here in the laws of Shabbat, he bases on the Yalkut Joseph outside the Tzurba for a moment. He gives you an advice, and he says as follows: if you're in such a case, if one is in a situation where he has no other choice but to hear Kiddush from such a person, someone who's Mechalel Shabbat, then what he should do is stare at the cup of wine that the other guy is holding and whisper Kiddush along with them. Okay? Yeah. Then this is, by the way, is all based that the wine is mevushal, right? Because the wine is not mevushal, then he's Mechalel Shabbat with Parhesya, perhaps he has a din like a guy, and then it's a problem with the wine. But let's say it's mevushal, right? So in that case, you can stare at the wine, say Kiddush with him under your breath, and you're Yotze, right? And then you'll be Yotze that way. Stare at the wine. Look at the wine. Yeah, look at the wine. And he's holding, whisper the Kiddush along with him.
Right.
Okay, so that is Rabbi Elazar Melamed. That is what practical comes out of over here. Okay, moving on. You're on page 24. And the proper time for Kiddush. Okay, so the Tur Rishon writes, You come to your house, Yimahir le'chol miyad. Right away, you should start eating. The Tanya, the Chortim Shabbat the Kacho.
Make a kiddush.
Right, Zechar Yam Mechnitzasa. As soon as Shabbos comes in, you make Kiddush. So the Shulchan Aruch, Kishiyavo Leveto, Yimahir le'ochol miyad. As soon as you come home, you got to make Kiddush. So you might think that means that as long as you're not home, you don't have to rush. However, the Yalkut Yosef, from Yitzchak Yosef, he adds, Achar Tfilat Arvit Yimahir lelech lebeto lekadesh. Shemitza lahaktim lekashes hayon. V'chol hazar zerezeh meshubach. V'chein lo yitzakev b'sicha im etpadalim. Don't stick in the shul talking. El yizardeh leveto kedei lekadesh. Run to your house and make kiddush. Okay. So he makes it clear that he's seeming to be understanding the Torah. It's not just when you get home, rush home, make kiddush. Okay. The Mishnah Brura, though, brings that, because another side of it. It says if you're not really hungry, perhaps you can wait to recite Kiddush. The whole thing is if you're hungry and you want to eat, then you have to rush to do it. But he says you should know that this might create issues at home. Just because you're full doesn't mean the rest of the household is full. And perhaps you should run home and make Kiddush. This way, everyone will get a chance to eat and will be shalom bayis. Just interesting to note that the Chafetz Chaim, Mishnah Brura, right? The Chafetz Chaim was noheg that when he had guests who were aniyim, he would not say shalom aleichem. He would go straight to Kiddush. And then once he finished Kiddush and gave out hamotzi and everything, he then sang shalom aleichem. And his reasoning for that was, people need to eat. People are hungry. People want to eat.
Really
right. They need to eat. So so perhaps we have to rush a little bit to start our Kiddush. Okay. Reciting Kiddush before nightfall. So this we looked at this already in last time in volume 16, but we'll look at it again over here. Hamsachas brachos chav zayin amud beis. Rav tzali shel Shabbos ve'erev Shabbos. Rav prayed Arvit on the eve of Shabbat. Omer Kiddush alakos. Ein Omer Kiddush alakos. Can you say Kiddush while it's still daytime? Right? You daven Arvit early. Can you say Kiddush?
Right.
So he says, Toshma, Nachman B'Shmuel, Mitzpalel Adam shel Shabbat be'erev Shabbat, Omer Kiddush alakos. And the halacha is like this: that you can make Kiddush while it's still daytime. Okay, we saw the Shulchan Aruch brought this lemaisa. The Shulchan Aruch and the Yalkut Yosef advised us that if you are making Kiddush early, then you should eat some bread once it's nightfall, right? You can eat some bread, so you should have your suda when it's nightfall, because we had some Mefarshim, some Rishonim that said that you should have your suda in actual nightfall. But the next piece, the Magen Avram, is the most interesting one. The Magen Avram writes in source number 9, "V'nirali dimrotze lekabel Shabbat mib'od yom v'lekadosh v'leochel v'letpalel aravit b'layla." You're allowed to, meaning it's 7:00 on a Friday in the summer. It's already after pod. I could be mikabel Shabbat, sit down in my house without praying aravit, set up the Shabbos table, make Kiddush, eat, finish my seudah, go to shul and pray.
But you know what? Nobody does it.
So the Maaser Rav, who's the Maaser Rav? This is the Talmidim of the Vilna Gaon, brought down that the Vilna Gaon was not happy with this at all. He said, what did the Gemara say? The Gemara said, Rav prayed and then said Kiddush while it was still daytime. He prayed first, then said Kiddush. He didn't make Kiddush and then pray. So the Vilna Gaon was not happy with this. In fact, in the footnote over here, he brings there Moshe Feinstein also was against it. Rabbi Solobelsky also, he said it's very odd. People it doesn't make sense. You're praying.
But nobody does it.
But
Nobody does it. And besides this,
I'll bring you.
The of Erev Shabbat is so short. It's what?
Right here.
10 minutes. What's the big deal?
Look what it says in the Yalkut Yosef. The Yalkut Yosef brings like Magen Avraham. And he says, "V'rashai Adam lekabel Shabbat v'od yom lekesh v'lochol v'achar kach yitpalel arvit b'layla." It's the Yalkut Yosef. I'm reading outside here for a minute, outside the Tzurba for a minute. He says you're allowed to do this. But you have to start a half hour before tzitz. And because if it's already half hour to say it, then you can't eat before you die, right? Because you always have that thing. You can't eat the Samach Tefillah. You have to pray first. So he's saying over here that if it's 7 o'clock and say it's 8:30, you can sit down, make your seudah, eat everything, and then go to shul and pray out of it Shabbat afterwards. Okay, so that's what he writes over here in the Yalkut Yosef.
There is a chat over here.
So what?
My wife should say, "Can you read the chat?" I don't know.
Oh yeah.
She's following us.
Okay. I see something in the chat. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, a good question. We have a question over here. Saying Kiddush right away. What if others are coming from a later minyan and is insulted if you don't wait? So I think in this case, we can hold that right away means as soon as possible. Meaning if you are waiting for people to come, then you're waiting for people to come.
What about if it's,
So Rabbi Netanel says something that I also very strongly agree with. If you're having guests, right? Your guests should be praying with you, right? Right. If you buy your parents, you should be praying by your parents. If you buy your in-laws, pray by where your in-laws go. It's a new trend nowadays. I see people come, family come. If this family praying in that shul, that guy's praying in that shul, everyone's praying where they are. Nobody knows who anyone is. Everyone's wherever they are. This is a little problematic. But again, if you are waiting for people to come, then your earliest is when everybody's there. So that would be as soon as possible.
What about if it's not a kid?
That what?
If somebody lives with you, and he goes to a different shul, goes to a different
So
shul,
again, same thing.
and he expects you to wait for him. And
So-
sometimes you have to wait for
You
him.
have to set ground rules. You have to set ground rules. We're making Kiddush at this time, that time. I'll tell you, it's Chatayim Skinner Yom when I was growing up as a teenager. Sometimes I woke up later, I went somewhere else and stuff like that. My father didn't wait. My father came home from shul. My mother was home. The girls were home. He made Kiddush. The boy came, I came, and then when I was younger, he wouldn't give me my own wine to make Kiddush on. It was either grape juice or you make Kiddush on bread, right? But after a while, you learned your lesson and you came on time, and you made sure to do Kiddush right.
Friday night, right?
What?
Friday night or also day?
To do it as soon as possible seems Friday night.
Friday night.
Because you want to make a Kaddish Shabbat b'knisato when it comes in.
Right.
Okay? Fine. Very good. Okay, laws of Shabbat. 1 second, just take a look at the Rabbi Nachson here on page 210, halacha 13. He writes the same idea. One may recite Kiddush and have his meal even before praying Arvit. However, preferably, this should not be done. Okay? He's bringing down like Rav Belsky, Rav Moshe Feinstein, and others. You could do it.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Exactly. Because you don't really see it. Like I
Where
said.
would this become applicable? I'll tell you where this became applicable.
Atuna.
I'll tell you where. You have little kids. Okay? And you're living in a place where they don't make early Shabbat. Okay? So now the little kids are going to go to sleep 8:30. By the time you come home from shul, it's going to be 9 o'clock.
Right.
So there, and I've seen this in practice. Okay? I've seen actually people do this. That it's in the summer, there's no early minyan, or they can't make it to the early minyan, whatever it is. So they'll make Kiddush, eat with the family, and then the father will go to shul and pray out of it, and he's allowed to do that. All right? There's a practical reason that you can do.
Okay.
But otherwise, we try not to.
Right.
Okay. All right, and then we talked about already. Right, we talked about taking a kazayit after nightfall, right? Making Kiddush early. Okay, what happened? One who does not recite Kiddush Friday night. Okay, so guy had a bad stomachache, couldn't eat anything Friday night. Okay, whatever it was, didn't make. He fell asleep. He came home from work. Said, "I'm gonna take a short nap." Fell asleep. Woke up Shabbat morning. Okay, didn't make Kiddush. What does he do now? So it says over here,
Have the whole day.
You can make Kiddush the entire day. What does this mean?
But the Kiddush of Erev Shabbat.
Right, Friday night.
Friday night.
Im loy Kiddush b'layla b'mishok b'mezid, says the Shulchan Aruch, source 12. Yesh lo tashlumin l'machar kol hayom. He can make Kiddush the entire day. It says the Rama, Rama kol Kiddush shel layla milvad vayichulu, except for vayichulu.
Because it's not anymore Vayichulu.
Right, because vayichulu is the start.
Right.
At the start of Shabbat. So here in the law of Shabbat, Rabbi Nachson, right? one who did not recite the Kiddush Friday night must recite the brachot of the nighttime Kiddush during the day, before Shkia. One recites the bracha of the Friday night Kiddush, but not Vayifulu. So you would say, how would you do it practically? Simon, Bore Priya Geffen, and then the bracha of Mekadesh Shabbat that you would say Friday night, and that would be your Shabbat morning Kiddush. Now,
After Tefillah.
Tefillah, Ken. So that's the Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan wants to say like you. The next time you eat Suda, you should say Bari Priya Geffen again. But others, almost everyone holds like Reb Chaim over here. That you don't have to do it. You don't have to do it. There's no. Because the truth is, the Kiddush of the day, what we're about to get into, it's really
For the wine.
It's just one bracha, Bari Priya Geffen. There is no second bracha, right? So here's the Gemara. We're on page 28. Gemara Masech Pesachim Kuf Vav Amud Aleph, and it says over here, Ainly in the Belayla, I only know to make Kiddush at night. But Yom and night, how do I know to do it in the daytime? Tamid Lomer Zechor et Yom HaShabbat. Remember the day of Shabbat. But Yom, my Mevarach, what do you bless? Rav Yehuda, Bari Priya Geffen. Rav Asha Ikla Mechuzah. Rav Ashi came to Mechuzah. Amarle, they said to him during the morning, okay, he's in the shul, or he went home to his guest, or whatever it was, and they told him, Likdish lan mar Kiddusha Rabbah. All right, they said to him, make for us great Kiddush. Kiddush Rabbah. So, and they brought him wine. So, Savar, he said, my nihu Kiddush Rabbah. What is Kiddush Rabbah? What's the great Kiddush? Right, Shabbat morning, Kiddush Boy Priya Geffen. Why are they calling it the great Kiddush? What's this great Kiddush? What do they say here in Mechuzah? So, he said, Amar Michti, let's see. He says, every Kiddush, every Havdalah, the first bracha is Bore Priya Geffen. Right? So I'll start with that. You can't go wrong. Right? In the set of Kiddush and Havdalah, Bore Priya Geffen is always first. So I'll say Bore Priya Geffen. So Amar Bore Priya Geffen Vagidbe. He said Bore Priya Geffen and he stretched it out. Meaning, he doesn't know what to say. So he said Bore Priya Geffen. He's waiting. He's looking around. While he's looking around, he sees one old man can't wait, and he's drinking his wine. So Kari, and I've said he called himself a chacham meinav b'rosho. He said, the smart guy, the wise person, right. His eyes are in his head.
I did right.
He did right, meaning they just call the Kiddush Rabbah, but it's just Bore Priya Geffen. So the Tosfos Rid said, so what does it mean? Why are they calling it Kiddush Rabbah? Why are they calling it the Great Kiddush? Like it sounds like it's like amazing Kiddush, like a long thing to say. So the Tosfos Rid says it's a Lashon Saginor. It's a Lashon Saginor. What's Saginor? We call the blind guy a euphemism. We call a blind guy full of light. That's the way the Gemara calls a blind person. He's full of light. It's a euphemism. So same thing. Kiddush Yom is one line. Bore Priya Geffen. There's nothing to it. So in order to give it a nicer touch, we call it Kiddush Rabbah, the great Kiddush, but it's only just one line. Okay. Again.
Why is it only one? Why is it so short?
It's just to Mechabit Shabbos and saying Bore Priya Geffen. There's nothing else to it. There's no other bracha.
Is it different than the night?
Because the night you have to be Mekadosh B'chisasa when he comes in. That's the din. You already did Kiddush. Right? Shabbos morning is just like a Zecher based on this Pasuk Zecher. Yom Shabbos, we're giving some cover to the morning.
With the wine.
Why is that? It says the pasuk says clearly.
Right. So how do you understand that pasuk? Is it, you think it could be deraita? Actually, some want to say it. Maybe it is. Very few want to say it is. Most say it's just a derabanan. It's more of a rabbinic than Friday nights, and so therefore it's just one liner. But we know, especially Sfaradim, we don't have no one-liners of nothing.
Yeah.
Right? You give us a one line, and we'll add 20 pages to it. Okay. So we work Hashem have many verses and psukim and stuff that I read beforehand. I'll tell you the truth that in my lifetime, especially at home, my father just started B'Shamaru. When he said Shabbat, we started always from B'Shamaru. When I'm in the shul, we would do it from Mizmor David and everything else. We read all the parts of everything that's in the Siddur. So this way, no one can say, hey, say this part, say that part. I'll say the whole page. But honestly, at home, I just start from B'Shamru B'nai Yisrael and Bore Priya Geffen. You don't have to really say anything. In fact, the one of the Brisker Ravs would not allow his students to say anything before. He said Kiddush Rabbah is one line, Bari Priyagafen, and that's it. You wouldn't say any other psukim to make it clear what Kiddush Rabbah is, because perhaps some people would become confused and think that Vishamaru and everything else that you say there is part and parcel of Kiddush. That's a lot of young kids do think that. They hear them doing it, think that's the Kiddush. That's the whole thing. You got
But it's like Divrei Torah by the table, no, Rabbi Moshe?
Yeah, so
It's like already we're saying words of Torah. It was before Kiddush, so it's a pity. It's a nice thing.
100%. It's a very nice thing that we do it. You can say everything. Personally, at home I say Mishamru, and that's it. But okay, now we're going to come into a machlokes, the Rambam and the Rabbi. Okay, Rambam says, and look in the bold on page 29, source 16. Before he makes kiddush on Shabbos morning, he's not allowed to eat anything. The gam kiddush zeh lo yeh elo b'malkum suda, and you have to have it in malkum suda. So the Rambam wants to compare the morning kiddush to the Friday night kiddush, and tell us the same way you can't eat Friday nights before kiddush, you can't eat Shabbos morning before kiddush after Shabbos or after you pray Shabbos. The Ravad says, uses some really sharp lashon. By my life, he says the svara. I never saw such a weak svara as this. I never saw such a weak logic as this Rambam's logic. He was very he says, you know why? The Rambam got confused, he wants to say. The Rambam heard that this is a Kiddush Rabbah, so he said, oh, great Kiddush, that's why you can't eat beforehand. The Rabbi says that is not right. Ve'ein klum. It's nothing. This Kiddush Rabbah is a nothing Kiddush, right? Shekvar nit kaddish hayom b'chisasai al hayayin kodim shiyutom ve'ilu bal kaddish yom al pas ilu kaddish v'tachshamayt zimokah berks hayayin v'yaf. So what he wants to say is, you make Kiddush Friday night, you're allowed to eat on Shabbos. You don't need to wait for Kiddush Shabbos morning to eat. Okay, and the Rambam said it because he got confused with the word Kiddush Rabbah, and he wants to compare it. He wants to compare it to Friday night Kiddush, and that's what he says.
Who's saying you can eat before
Kiddush Shabbos morning?
Yeah.
The Ravad.
What about the Rambam?
The Rambam says no. Rambam says you can't eat. You have to make Kiddush.
But we learn already. We cannot eat before the
right,
tefillah.
because the Shulchan Aruch writes that. Before tefillah, that's another story.
No,
but we say
until we finish tefillah, then we can really eat. And no,
the chiyuv of Kiddush is only after Shachrit.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So according to this, you pray Shachrit. According to the Ravad, I don't need to make Kiddush. Right. I can eat without Kiddush. Rambam says no such thing. Once the chiyuv of Kiddush comes in, you have to make Kiddush. You can't eat without it. There is, but it's just showing cover. There's no thing that you can't eat before that Kiddush.
What happened with Zachor Yom Shabbat?
It's saying Bar Pri Geffen before Suda, but it's not like you can't eat beforehand.
Okay, anyway, we don't go
according to the Rambam. The Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch is clear. Shulchan Aruch holds like the Rambam says before Kiddush Shabbos morning you can't eat.
Okay. People eating, you have to scream at them why you eating.
You don't have to.
Yeah, I'm saying. I don't know.
No, we don't pass like the Rabbi at all. We don't take him.
Chabad going according to him.
We hold that you
Chabad have the whole meal
before Kiddush.
No, before Shacharit.
Because they
have chulent and this and that.
It's different issue.
It's because, by the way, before you say anything about Chabad, first of all, their minhag, whoever follows Chabad, their minhag is to say all of Tehillim before going to Shul Shachrit Shabbat. They complete the whole sefer of Tehillim, and that's why they have these coolers of eating and all this stuff before that. Well, officially, that's their minhag. I know my cousins are doing it.
The whole Tehillim. How can you finish the whole Tehillim?
You're allowed to eat, but you're not allowed to eat everything, right? You can't eat bread and stuff like that. Yeah. There are permissions. There are permissibles. There are permissibilities to eat before Shachrit on Shabbat, as long as you're not eating like a Suda type of thing, small amount of mezonot, fish, whatever you want, some fruits, stuff like that, it wouldn't be a problem. Okay, we already saw that. Okay, now we come to the main event of tonight. Main event. All right, this is your entree. All that was appetizers. Now we're coming to the entree. And here is making Kiddush
on the bread,
not on wine. Okay, so bread and what we call chamar medina, which is the drink of the city. We'll have to get into all of this. But let's start a look. Let's start on page 30. We're on source 18. Amar Rab Beruna Amar Rab. Hanotel Yadav Lo Yikadesh. Okay. Person washed his hands before he made Kiddush. So he should not make Kiddush. Yeah. He washed his hands, then he tilat yadayim.
He washed for bread.
He made it tilat yadayim. He washed for bread. Realized it was the Kiddush. Didn't make Kiddush. Says lo yikash. Don't make Kiddush. Because it would make a hefsek between your washing and eating bread. So you can't make Kiddush. Instead, the Rashbam, we're going to learn through the Rashbam holds. The way the Rashbam understands Gemara is that instead you should hear Kiddush from someone else and then make your hamotzi. Okay, you wash your hands. Don't talk. Don't make Kiddush. Hear someone else make Kiddush, then make a hamotzi. Okay. So the Gemara comes and says, Yitzchak Bar Shmuel Bar Martha said to them, it hasn't been so much time since Rav died and you already forgot his rulings? Many times I stood before Rav, and sometimes he was hungry and he wanted bread, and he said Kiddush on bread. And there was time when he wanted wine, and he said Kiddush on wine. So the Gemara says that Rav would sometimes make Kiddush on bread. This is the way the Rashbam understands this Gemara. Okay? The Rashbam understands this Gemara that says that you cannot make Kiddush on wine, and then eat hamotzi. If you're washing, you have to make hamotzi. And Rav sometimes made Kiddush on bread. Okay? He washed, he made hamotzi, said the Kiddush Mekadesh Shabbat, and ate that. All right? That way. Tosafot, Rabbeinu Tam, he writes, near Rabbeinu Tam, the Mekachin alapat kelal. Rabbeinu Tam held, you can never make Kiddush on bread. Bread is not an option to make Kiddush on.
But he's going against, right?
No, he's reading the Gemara differently. You have to understand how he understands the Gemara. He understood as follows. I'm going to say it outside, but you can go through the Tosfot. The way the Rabbeinu Tam understood Gemara was as follows. Rav would sometimes want to eat bread. He would wash his hands for bread, take out his cup of wine, make Kiddush after washing, make Kiddush on wine, and then he would say the hamotzi. He wash his hands first, sit down, take his cup of wine, make drink the wine, then make the hamotzi on the bread. Why is it not Masiach Dato? Because he holds that Kiddush b'makom suda. My Kiddush is not in place. It has to be in a place where there's my meal.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's not Masiach Das because Kiddush and meal are connected. Therefore, I can make my Kiddush before my bread, and washing my hands doesn't interrupt because I have to have my suda there. So the way he understands this Gemara was that Rav would wash his hands, make Kiddush, and then make a hamotzi. Sometimes he did it that way, and sometimes he wanted wine, so he just made Kiddush, and then he went and made a hamotzi. So that's the way the Machloket Rishonim over here, Rashbam and Rabbeinu Tam, how to understand this Gemara. The Rambam, he writes, a person who desires bread more than wine, or he doesn't have wine, right? You don't have wine, or you want bread, wash your hands, make hamotzi on the bread, and then make the bracha Mekadesh Shabbat on the bread, and then break the bread and eat it. Make Kiddush on bread. So he holds clearly not like Rabbeinu Tam. Like Rabbeinu Tam said, you can't make Kiddush on bread. The Rambam writes, you could make Kiddush on bread. Okay? So we have the Rambam. And the Rambam brings another halacha. Look at the second piece, the second paragraph.
But I don't understand what Rabbeinu Tam said.
Again.
We have over here Amora, he's saying the Shem of Rav. He said, Amalo Rav Yitzchak Bar Shmuel Bar Marta, הקאטה לא נחה נפשי דרב שכחינו לשמטה.
We forgot what his halacha was. Okay.
He's saying,
Okay.
I'm
So
sure-
what was the halacha?
He's
Zminan Tagian of a Kamei Rab. Zminan de Chaviva ala Rifta. Sometimes he loved bread. He wanted bread. The Kaddish a Rifta. He made Kiddush on bread. Benu Thomas says that's not the way. You're
Kiddush on the wine and then on the
but
bread.
that's why he's learning it. He's Mekadesh Arifta. He made Kiddush before bread, while he already washed. He's interpreting this Gemara. He has a right to do that. He's a Rishon. I understand you're saying it's more clear like the Rashbam. In fact, the Rambam holds like you too. The Rambam says that's the Pasha the way we read the Gemara.
Yeah.
He's Mekadesh on bread, not that he made Kiddush before bread.
He's saying exactly what
The
he's
Rush also brings down V'nago Amakash Lapas V'chein Eskima Kol HaGaonim. Rush says everyone can make Kiddush on the bread. This is the way learn the Gemara like the Rashbam, like the Rambam,
Pshuto.
the
And
Pshuto.
not trying to make
The Ramah writes V'im Yain Be'ir. If you have wine in the city, Lo Yikadesh Alapad. Do not make Kiddush on bread. So it's like, you could do it, but you shouldn't do it. It's one of those other ones, right? Just to show you the way to do it over here in the laws of Shabbat outside of the Tzurba for a minute. One should wash his hands first, recite the bracha on Tilaim, return to his place, recite Vaychu while the bread is still covered. Then one should uncover the bread, place both hands in it, recite Hamotzi, and then make Kiddush Shabbat, and then break off a piece of bread and eat the bread. That's how if you make Kiddush on bread, that's the way you do it. Vaychu while it's still under the cover, and then you take it out, make a motzi, and everything else. So right, the Ramah adds on. If you have wine, you should not use bread. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay. I just read the process. I don't have wine. Okay. So I have to make Kiddush on bread. Go. I wash my hands. Come back to the table. I leave the bread under the cover. I say Vaychulu. I finish saying Vaychulu. I open the cover. I take both breads in my hand. And I say Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Instead of saying Borei Pri HaGefen, I say Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Then I say the bracha of Nekadesh Shabbat. Once I do that, then I break it and I eat it. So it's replacing bread with wine, right? It's replacing the bread instead of the wine.
Instead of wine.
Now, the Rambam wrote, right, if someone has a taiva for bread or he doesn't have wine, right? And the Ramah says, if you have wine, don't use bread. Okay? The Bir Halacha, he writes, it applies even if he prefers, on page 32, even if he prefers bread more than wine. However, I saw in Derech Chaim that he rules if he prefers bread more than wine, he may recite Kiddush over bread. So it's a machloket, whether if you prefer bread, you can use it or not. Ramah says you still should use wine, but he says some say, like the Rambam, preferring bread means that he prefers it over wine. But the Torah quotes Rav Hai, who says preferring bread means that you don't enjoy wine, meaning that it's harsh on your stomach or you can't tolerate it. That's what it means, preferring bread, that you have a trouble with wine. But what does it mean, preferring bread? Does it mean I just like bread over wine? Or it means I have trouble with wine? Right? That's machloket how to understand that. Right. It seems that in the case of Hai, one certainly can rely on the view of the Bet Yosef to recite Kiddush over bread lechatchila. So if you have problem with wine, can't tolerate it, or if a person is diabetic and the sugars in the wine is more problematic for him, so then he has the permission to go and make Kiddush on the bread. Lechatchila. Here in the laws of Shabbat outside the Tzurba for a moment, Rabbi Nachson writes, one who cannot drink wine for health reasons may recite Kiddush on bread, even if there's no one else available, if there is no one else available to say Kiddush over wine. If he has someone else that can say Kiddush over wine, that's better. He doesn't have to taste it. He can just eat the bread afterwards. Yeah. We'll deal with the next case in a moment. Okay. Shulchan Aruch brings in source 24. After reciting Kiddush over the cup, one should wash one's hands and recite the bracha aval netilat yadayim. If he washed his hands before Kiddush, the guy came home and he forgot to say Kiddush, and somehow he was so hungry, he just washed his hands. I tell you now, sat down, realized I didn't make Kiddush yet. What does he do at this time? So he says, he has shown that he liked bread more. Once you've washed your hands and you didn't make Kiddush, that's shown that you like bread more. Kiddush al yain, you cannot make Kiddush on wine. El alapat. At this point, he has to make Kiddush on the bread. So if you wash your hands before making Kiddush, you're going to have to make Kiddush on bread. Okay, and the Yalkut Yosef brings this down lahalacha. He says this is the halacha, just like the Shulchan Aruch. He says if someone washes his hand before reciting Kiddush, he has demonstrated he enjoys the bread more than wine, and he must recite Kiddush over his bread and not over wine.
He's demonstrating he's very hungry.
Yes. Now, the Ramah adds something very interesting. The Ramah writes, and it's only for Ashkenazim, and only some Ashkenazim today. Some say, he writes, Yesh litol yodav koydem HaKiddush with the Kaddish al yain. Remember Rabbeinu Tam? Rabbeinu Tam said, what did Rab do? Sometimes he washed his hand, said Kiddush on a cup, and then made Hamotzi. The Ramah says, there are some who say you should always do this. Every week you should do this.
No, but what he's saying.
V'chein haminak poshet b'medinas elu v'ein l'shnot rak b'leil Pesach. Only on Pesach night don't do this. Why? Because your hamotzi on Pesach is way after Magid, right? You can't wash your hands, make Kiddush, and then make hamotzi on that after Magid. So therefore, only Pesach night you make Kiddush before after, and then you afterwards wash your hands. But every other night, every other Friday night, according to the Ramah, until this very day, the Yekis do this. German Jews of German descent, they do this till today.
What?
They wash their hands on Tadaim. They make Kiddush on wine, and then say Hamotzi.
Right over Hamotzi.
Right after Kiddush and wine.
No again.
No again washing.
What?
Because the Rabbeinu Tam held that it's Kiddush and Makam Suda. It's not a Siach Das, not a nothing, and you can just go straight. So there are Jews that do this till this very day. German Jews who do this.
But why is it Nachatila?
He's learning the Gemara. Why do it that way?
Like, why Dafka do it this way?
That's a good question.
Tell you why. Because he's saying the same way you are washing. Why are you washing your hands before bread? You want to make the bread chashuv, right? So he said, make the kiddush chashuv. Wash your hands before the kiddush. Be naki, be tahor, do the kiddush, and then you do the hamut.
Hey.
The problem is your hands get wet.
What?
Hands get wet, and it's not tummy. The wine is not tummy. You got the tummy. If you got the wine tummy, then it becomes tummy. But it's not. The wine's not tummy.
But the hands are not wet. You dry them.
Okay. Now the Mishnah Brewer writes that many Achronim write lechatchila it's better to make kiddush and then to wash your hands, like the Shulchan Aruch. And in fact, in the footnote over here, he writes that it used to be the minhag, not just of German Jews. Most of the Ashkenazi Jews used to do this. Used to wash their hands, make kiddush, and then say hamotzi right away. He says today it's only German Jews. He writes in the footnote over here. But he writes, and this is a difference in how Svarik and Ashkenazim would do this point. He writes over here, if a person accidentally washes his hands before Kiddush, Yesh la'asot keharama. Ashkenazim should do like the Ramah, take out the wine and make the Kiddush, and then make Hamotzi, because the Ramah said that's lechatchila, right? So we Sephardim who say once you wash your hands, you show you want to do it on bread, right? So then you got to make Kiddush on bread. Ashkenazim, if he washed his hands, no, he cannot make the Kiddush on bread. He has to make Kiddush still on wine, and then make Hamotzi on the bread. So that case, the guy who came in and washed his hands, right, would be a difference if it's Ashkenazi fellow or a Sephardic fellow.
Something like this, such a inyan pashut. How come we don't have a tradition?
That what? How
like
did it?
One say like this, one say like this, one say like this.
Based on how you learn.
Tradition.
It's based on how you learn the Gemara.
What is the best you learn the Gemara? We have a tradition from Ableben. Where's the tradition? Huh?
That's their Misorah. They did it that way. You have to remember. You have to remember. How did we start this whole topic today? We started with the different Havaras, right? Why is that?
Okay. Different varieties.
No, but you have to understand.
It's something else.
Let me speak 1 second.
Different country.
In Klal Yisrael, from the start, there were 12 Shvatim. Each Shevet had their own flag. Each Shevet had their own animal. Each Shevet had their own thing. Each Shevet had their own way. So having different nusachs in Judaism is from the start. Okay, from the start it exists. So therefore, if you see it, it's perfectly fine. Because
the Gemara doesn't say so.
well, I'm telling you how to view it.
Doesn't say we have 12.
What do you mean? It's Pasha.
The Gemara is one Gemara for everybody.
The Gemara always brings out this Tana did it this way, this Amora did it this way, this did it like that.
Because like he said, they forgot.
Nah, no,
Because they were
Elu, Divrei Elokim Chai.
they were scattered by many
All
places.
right. This is for a different time. This is a good topic. We'll have to get into it maybe in the summer. We'll spend the day on Elu Divrei Elokim Chai. Okay. Using other drinks for Kiddush. So we looked at bread. So we saw bread we can technically use. It's better not to use bread if you have wine, but bread can be used for Kiddush. So far, by the way, we're talking Friday night. By the way.
Yeah.
Shabbat morning, we'll see about that in a minute. Okay, using other drinks for Kiddush. Gemara Psachim, Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph, says that, who was this? A Maimar once came to a place, and it was Havdalah time. He's looking for wine, no wine. Went to sleep without making Havdalah, waited for the next day, then they brought him wine, right? Because all they had available was beer. Next year he comes back, for another visit. Again, they bring him beer for Havdalah. He says, "Ooh, they're bringing me beer. Chamar midinahu. It must be the drink of the city." And he made Havdalah on the beer. Okay, so we see that a Maimar made Havdalah on beer when beer, and by the way, beer back in the olden days was made out of mead. Mead is honey. Dates. Dates is correct. Dates is correct.
Right.
Dates. Today's beer is mostly barley. So,
But you know why?
it's just historically it's a little different.
Because those days in Babel, they had a lot of
Dates.
dates.
Okay. Now
This was the main food.
the further in the Gemara, Rav Huna asked Rav Chizda, "What's the halacha of making kiddush over beer? Barley beer, fig beer, berry beer." So they asked the question for the Rav. Rav asked Rav Chia. Rav Chia asked Rav Yehuda Nasi. No one resolved it. I'm not sure what to do with beer. Okay, so it was a question. Most understood it that it means Kiddush you cannot use beer, but Havdalah you can. One writes you can't use it for Kiddush, you can't use it for Havdalah. One says you can use it for Kiddush, use it for Havdalah, and you can use it for Havdalah, you could use it for Kiddush. Right, the Gemara further on source 28. Mikashim on beer. You could make. So the Gemara back and forth, no real resolving in the Gemara about using beer. We do see a Maimar using beer for Havdalah, but Kiddush is definitely no answer. Can you use beer for Kiddush? So the Ritz Giyat, he says it makes sense not to use beer for Kiddush, but to use beer for Havdalah. And he says, you know why? Because you can use bread for Kiddush. You can't use bread for Havdalah. There's no bread for Havdalah. You never make bread. You never make Havdalah on bread. That doesn't exist. Therefore, if you don't have wine, you have to use something else. So therefore, you can use beer. But when it comes to Kiddush, don't use beer because you have bread. Okay.
The Ashkenazim in the time of Tisha B'Av,
Right.
because you cannot allow to
And Motzei Shabbat, they make Havdalah
on beer.
Right. They also do that. They also do that on Motzei Pesach. They want to away Hametz. They want to make Kiddush. They'll make Havdalah on Hametz. So they go into the Goyish store, they buy the beer, and they make Havdalah on beer. They do that also. So Motzei Shabbat and Motzei Pesach.
Bar park. I was staying with somebody and they made Kiddush Day.
So Kiddush Day. We're gonna deal with that in a minute. Very good. Medina Shirov Yena Sheikhar, in a place where most of its major drink is beer. Apel Pishahu, possibly Kiddush, Mutter Lahavdil Allah. Right? And that's the Rambam. So Rambam makes it very clear. Kiddush, you can't use beer. Havdalah, you can use beer. Now the Rosh. And this is the way Shulchan Aruch passes like this Rosh. And this is the Rosh, and this is where you explain what you saw that Shabbat morning. The Rosh writes that the view of the Ri appears to lean toward allowing reciting Kiddush over beer if it's Chamar Medina. The Rabban also says this. It appears to me, yearly, Afal pisha yochel kalash al shechar imhu chamer medina tovu yoter the kalash al pat. It's better to make it on the bread. Even shahasuda ba lichpot Shabbos baboker. What about Shabbos morning? Yira sheyivarach al hashecher kodim berkat hamotzi. You should possibly make on the beer kiddush and then make hamotzi. The imlokain batul kiddush shel hayom. They're being late mikra kemoy kiddush halayla, right? And why does it become batul? Why if you make kiddush on bread during the day, why is kiddush to become batul? No. If I make kiddush on bread during the day, he said if I make kiddush on bread during the day, there's no kiddush. Why is that? Because remember, kiddush of the day is a one-liner or a priyagefim. If I don't have wine and I'm using bread, then what am I making for kiddush? But I'm going to make a motzi lechem menaretz anyway, because every suda starts with the motzi lechem menaretz. So there's no recognition that there is kiddush. So the Rosh says, because of that, use Kamar Medina for Kiddush daytime if you don't have wine over bread.
Oh, and say shakol.
Yes, say shahakol.
So this is exactly what they do.
Exactly.
On the whiskey.
So the whiskey, we'll see the qualification. Give me a minute.
Huh?
We'll see. The Mishnah Berurah brings that down. But 1 second. So Shulchan Aruch, take a look at source 32. Shulchan Aruch says this Rush. And he says, V'l'harush, v'layla, lo yikadosh al sheikhar. Eila alapas, make it only on bread Friday night. You don't have wine. Uba boker, yoter tov v'kalash al sheikhar. It's better to make it on the beer. Shivarach al shahakar, kind of brikas amotzi. Shivarach al pas tchila, ein kam shum shirui. V'divrei ta'am heim. And they are well reasons.
Right, because he gets another bracha also.
Very good. Another bracha gets his 100 brachas.
It's better to make
If you don't have
Medina than bread, but why wine? Why Chamar Medina over wine?
No.
You have
You have wine, you have to use wine.
The best. Wine is the best.
Bar park, they were making dafka.
Okay. So that we're going to get into. So if you look at the next Mishnah Berurah, the next Mishnah Berurah, it's based on the Mishnah Berurah. But this next Mishnah Berurah talks about if you have wine, you should definitely use wine. All right, look at source number 33 and number 29 over there. Sifkaf Tes, right? So he writes, but in a place where wine is readily available, one should certainly make a bracha over it, even in the daytime. Even if it's expensive, if you have it, you should get it, 100%. It's Mishnah Berurah writes that. But then the next Mishnah Berurah, in source 34, he writes, if it's more preferable to him, this whiskey, so this is what the Ashkenazim do. They based it on this Mishnah Berurah that says that if you like whiskey more than wine, Shabbos morning, you can do it. Beer, whatever it is. Beer, whiskey, doesn't make a difference. Vodka, whatever it is. Hamar Medina has to be alcoholic. We'll see that we have to be somewhat alcoholic. If it's such a thing and you like it, technically you can use it over, Mishnah Berurah says. However, you can already guess what his opinion on this is. Right? So Yibia Omer, he writes that people who recite Kiddush Rabbah over beer, even though there's wine in the city because the wine is expensive or because they like it, they're not doing properly. They're not doing properly. Right? Lo Yafa Osim. They're not doing right. So Chamuvadia was very clear. You got wine, it's Kiddush on wine. Don't bring out the beer. All right? Save the beer for later. Okay, another one in the chat. I'm sorry, I just don't see the chat.
Is there a halachot how much you have to drink? I mean,
yes. We're going to see it in a minute.
Vodka, how much
So we have a good question here. What if your host makes kiddush on whiskey or the like, and wine is available? I'm Sephardi. I need it on wine. Okay, and the Ashkenazic host is making it on whiskey. Is it enough? Okay, give me a minute or two. I think I'm going to touch it. Give me a minute. I think I have it written down. Okay. Before we move on, take a look at the Hilchot over here in the Sefer Hayom Amil Rabbi Nakson. We're on page 268 outside the Tzurba. Just give me a minute. Outside the Tzurba, just the practicalities of this halacha. He writes here as follows. Even though during the night Kiddush, one should recite Kiddush upon bread when wine is unavailable. For the daytime Kiddush, one can recite Kiddush on Hamar Medina. First of all, here are some things you have to fulfill. One is unable to find wine. or if one is ill and cannot drink wine. And there's no one else who can make Kiddush on wine on his behalf. Okay, that's number one.
Yeah.
Number two, the drink must be alcoholic. So it can be considered Hamar Midina, it has to be alcoholic. The drink must be served and normally drunk by people in one's country and be considered a respectable drink. D, the cup must hold the revi'it of the drink. You can't take a shot glass of whiskey and make Kiddush. Now, the people who do that, they base it on a Taz. The Taz is not in Hilchot of Kiddush. The Taz is in Hilchot Berachot Achrana. And he writes that if you drink what people consider a drink, even though it's less than the revi'it, you should still make a bracha achrona. So based on this, they want to say that you can make even Kiddush if it's less than the revi'it, if it's considered a shot. Right? It's considered a drink. However, we don't hold that at all. That's already pushing it. Even if one is using whiskey, he has to use a cup that has a revi'it, and he has to drink a majority of the revi'it. All right, all of that has to be fulfilled. Okay, so here is the question that was in the chat. Even though many Ashkenazim are lenient regarding reciting Kiddush on Chamar Medina, a Sephardi should not fulfill his obligation of Kiddush through the bracha of an Ashkenazi who recited Kiddush on Chamar Medina, even though wine is available. Rather, one should find wine or grape juice and recite Kiddush as required. This is from the Yalkut Yosef. Yalkut Yosef says, you're in a place and they're making Kiddush on Chamar Medina and wine is sitting on the table. You cannot be Yosef through that Kiddush of the Chamar Medina. You have to take the wine and make Kiddush.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's how far.
Big.
Yeah, so we're very strong at making sure we use the wine.
You guys.
Okay, very strong at making sure we use the wine. Okay. So, okay, the last part over here, Shmirat Shabbat, Hilchata, on page 38, and this section, he writes in source 36, he writes, if you don't have bread, you don't have wine, you don't have Chamar Medina, you don't have bread, I only have cookies. Right? He says you can make Kiddush on cookies. Okay? Ein lo gam pas, but because you Kaddish, okay, then he says you don't have even pas, you don't pop a couple of kisanin, you can make it on other things. Not that simple. Not that simple. First of all, Yalkut Yosef says if you're going to use a pata baba kisanin, you're going to use mizonot products, you have to have a lot of mizonot that you're able to make hamotzi on it. Okay? You can't just make a kiddush on a cookie. It's got to be a hamotzi kiddush. Okay, so you have to have enough of it to make that amount. And if you don't have other stuff, then you can't make kiddush on them. If you don't have a Chamar Medina, you can't make kiddush on Sprite, you can't make kiddush on Coca-Cola, you can't make kiddush on those things. We hold that we cannot do that. Okay? It has to be what's Chamar Medina. All right, the next big sugya over here, I have to keep to the time. What time is it right now? Okay, so we have about 10 minutes. Should be plenty of time. We'll do it outside mostly. Diluted wine. Okay, diluted wine. We have to have wine for Kiddush. If I dilute it, is it still considered wine? So first of all,
depends how you start it.
Okay.
How strong it is.
So the Gemara Masechet Bava Batra talks about pomace. Remember pomace? You know what pomace is? Dregs. And dregs in the wine, the pomace, right? You'll see some oil says from pomace or something like that. That is basically once you crush the grape or the olive or the dates, and you have the leftovers in there. Okay? So now you can pour water on top of it.
And then it become more
and you
wine.
can make more wine. Right? The Gemara deals with this. Multiple places. Okay. So over there the Gemara says that I'm not gonna go through the whole Gemara, you can go through it yourself. But basically, Rav held that wine, what's considered wine? 1 part wine, 3 parts water. Okay, that's the way they used to make in the Talmudical time.
Their wine was so strong,
right?
They needed to dilute.
That's correct. Their wine was very different. So it's 25% wine, 75% water. That was considered wine. Okay, if it was less than that, then it's not considered wine. If wine is less than 25%, then it's not considered wine. It has to be 25% as the wine. 1 to 3. And that was the ratio. If it was less than 1 to 3, it's not considered wine. Okay, so if it's 10% wine in there, it's not considered wine. Not considered wine for yain nesach. It's not considered wine for anything. For putting the wine on the mizbech, you can't use it. It's not considered wine.
Grape drink.
Huh? A grape drink. Very good. Now, the Rambam. Now, this Gemara is talking about pomace. is when you have dregs, you have the pieces left, and you put
The pieces from
Three-
the grapes.
the Gemara talks about it this way. He takes 3 jugs of water, pours it on top of these things, and 4 jugs of this wine come out. So what do you have? You put in 3 jugs of water, right? Three jugs of water, and came out after you poured on the thing 4.
Whoa.
So what do you have? You have 1 to 3.
Yeah,
So that's wine.
that's good.
All right, it's less. But the Gemara is talking about dregs. So the Ramban, on source 39, he writes, 1 to 3 is only when you're using dregs on pomace, these pieces. But if I have actual wine, real strong wine, then it could be even less, right? You could have 1 to 5, okay, because it's really strong wine. It's only when it's dregs on pomace that it has to be 1 to 3. That's the Ramban, okay? If you're using actual strong wine. Take a look at the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch writes that over wine pomace, one should recite the bracha or a priya geffen. If one added water to it, if he added 3 measures of water, and the resultant beverage came to 4 measures, right? That's the regular diluted wine of 1 to 3. You make a bar priya geffen. But then the Shulchan Aruch writes, in his time already, right? 1500s, right? He writes, with our wines, which are not strong, even if one poured 3 measures, and the resultant beverage came to 4 measures, one should not recite the bracha of bar priya geffen. So Shulchan Aruch writes, in his time, wine was no longer strong. It's no longer 1 to 3. It's less. The ratio of wine has to be greater. It can't be 25%. It has to be greater. The Ramah writes, interestingly, the Ramah says wine could be wine up to 1/6, which means 83% could be water. All right. So what is the Ramah talking about? So the Mishnah Berurah says the Ramah is talking about actual wine, not the pomace, right? It can't be pomace, it's 83% of the dregs. It has to be actual wine. Lemaaseh, what do we actually do? So we all hold pretty much like the Pri Megadim on page 42, source 43. The Pri Megadim writes, Kol sheyesh rov mayim, roi levarach shahak. Once the majority of the drink is water, it's shahak. That means you have to have a majority of wine. The 51% of the bottle needs to be wine. It says 100%, then it's 100%. Okay, it's a whole different question. If you can trust the label, right? But that's halakha is as follows. That's the way we learn. Pri Megadim, right? You go with rov. Today it's rov, right? From concentrate, right? That's a good question. We'll get into that later. But for the moment, we'll take a look at the Yalkut Yosef outside on page 234 over here in the English edition in Halacha 7 and 8. And he writes, any wine which contains more than 50% water may not be used for Kiddush. If the wine is more than 50% water, it cannot be used for Kiddush. He says there are many wines today marketed in the Jewish world that go with this Ramah of 1 to 6, which means 86% is 83% is water. That would be a problem for us Sephardim, right? Ashkenazic wines that are going with this Ramah of 1 to 6 is still considered wine. That's 83% water. We can't use that. That's shahako, right? They had the story. Chacham Ovadia was once invited to Mekadosh, to Masada Kiddushin, and they brought him a wine, right? And the wine was under Ashkenazic hashgacha that followed the Ramah, right? And he said a shahako, right, under the chuppah, okay, because it wasn't yain, okay, it wasn't yain. However, I know someone's going to ask this question in the chat. What happens if I'm sitting with a host who's Ashkenaz and he's using a wine that's 83% water? He's making Kiddush. It's not wine for me. So he writes over here, as far as a Jew who listens to an Ashkenaz to recite Kiddush or Avdallah for him using wine that is more than 50% water is Yotzeh. Because according to the Ashkenazi guy, it is valid for Kiddush for him. So it's interesting. By Chamar Medina, he says no. The Ashkenazi guys, you can't. It's not Kiddush. The wine that's 83%, that's okay. If the Ashkenaz guy does it for you, but we can't use it. Okay, that's on the hilchot of diluted wine. We come to grape juice. Grape juice. Most poskim say it's basically Gemara. The Gemara says if you squeeze wine and right away you can make kiddush over it. I mean, you're squeezing grapes and right away make kiddush. I mean, it's grape juice. Didn't get a chance to ferment yet. So pretty much most poskim say you can use grape juice. Again, the same halacha like the wine has to be that 50%. It has to be more than 51% of the juice. 51% juice has to be more than roe, has to be the actual juice. If it's more water than juice, you can't use it. Another issue that Rav Eliashiv brought up was the issue if they chemically prevented fermentation. They put into it chemicals that it shouldn't ferment. Right? Maybe that cannot be considered a grape juice that's like wine. Because grape juice is grape juice because it could have become wine. But if you put these chemicals, it can't become wine. Right? Others want to say that's not a problem because you only need it to become like wine for the mizbeach. But Kiddush, that's okay, even if it's not going to become wine. So for us, the main thing is that it should be that the water content has to be less than 50%. It's 50% more water content than the juice. You cannot use that juice. Here I brought something down from Rabbi Nachson on page 217 and halacha right here, halacha 47. One may use any wine or grape juice as long as there's 50% of water. There's less than 50% of water. If you're not sure, you cannot use it. Preferably, one should use alcoholic wine. If it's not possible, you should use grape juice. One should try to mix in some alcohol into the grape juice. So if you're going to have to use grape juice, it's good to put in a little bit of the wine in there to give it somewhat of an alcoholic taste, because that's what it should be. And we'll end off with the last section over here, and that is white wine. Can we use white wine? And we know on Pesach night, we want to use red wine and help us to remember the dam and other things. But what about white wine? So this Gemara Baba Batra, someone asked, Rav Kahana, the father-in-law of Rav Sharshia, asked Rava, what's the status of white wine? And he read a pasuk that said, wine is red, meaning that white wine is not wine.
What, like white chocolate's not real chocolate?
Right. So the Ramban in Baba Batra, the Ramban says white wine is not wine and you're not allowed to use it.
Don't put the skin, right? Is that what it is?
I'm not sure how it is, but he says you can't use it.
They don't put the skin. No, it's not color, but I think it has to do with the skin. They don't put the skin.
You get the yellow.
The Ramban says even b'di avad you cannot use white wine. That's how strong the Ramban is. Can never use white wine. The Rashbam says no. When the Gemara says that wine is not, the Gemara is yes, it's white wine. What can I do with white wine? He says no, wine is red. He's talking about pouring wine in the mizbeach, not about Kiddush. Kiddush, you could use white wine. So Shulchan Aruch brings both deot. He brings you could use, and then he says the Ramban says you don't use. So the practical thing is that we don't use white wine. We really use red wine. Mishnah Berurah also brings that down. We should use red wine over white wine. There are those who say that the white wine that the Gemara was talking about is not the white wine that we have today. So today's white wine is not an issue. The Ramban, who said you can't use white wine, even b'di avad, wasn't talking about the white wine we have today. The white wine they had then, the white wine we have today is two different white wines. Therefore, white wine should be okay. Again, most people do not use white wine today. What about someone once asked me, Rabbi, can I put in my white wine, put a little bit red inside? I put a little bit of red to make it inside. It looks like that doesn't necessarily really help. White wine is white wine, and throwing in a little bit red, not necessarily going to help that situation. Again, we paskin that you could use white wine, but preferably to use the red wine in deference to the Ramban. Okay.
Used in both
And we'll end up with this. We have minyan.
Yeah.
Okay. Rabbi Hanina v'kashar me'atzai kadosh baruch hu zakoi Yisrael לפי כן חבר המתור מצוות שנאמר אדוני חפץ למען צדקו יגדיל תורה וידיר.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
Yeah.
Oh.
Zayman.